Hello, BookTube. It's a beautiful summer day here in Boston, and we're in between two horrendous peaks. We just had a heat wave, Boston's very first heat wave of the year. That went away. That the rampant heat and the high humidity eventually washed out. But a string of hot days is coming tomorrow and for the rest of the week. Not technically a heat wave. A heat wave is technically 3 consecutive days of 90-degree temperatures or more. And that's not going to be true, but does it really make a difference if the temperature is 87, 88, 89, 3 days in a row? I don't know that that 1 or 2 degrees makes a difference. So it's still going to be mighty hot and mighty humid, not fit for lots and lots of activity. And when there's a trough like that, I like to take advantage of it. So I went to the Brattle Bookshop in downtown Boston, a used bookstore that I love. I've been going to for well over a year. And I had no prodding to do so this time. I was not going because David Murphy was here as my guest. I was not going because Aaron Facer did a book haul of his own and taunted me to make one. I went just because I like to go to the Brattle. I was happily going to the Brattle long before David Murphy or Aaron Facer were born. So I went. I had a couple of other errands to run down in that area of town. So I did those first. Then I went to the shop. It was a beautiful morning for it. Wasn't hot. I got there early, so the entire sale lot outside were just $1, $3, and $5 sale books. That's where I spend most of my time. And early in the morning, the whole lot is covered in shade. The sun hasn't crossed the buildings yet, so it's nice and comfortable to browse. So I did, and I got a pile of books, a gigantic pile of books that I want to show you. So the first two, I got a number of placeholder books here. So one of the features of shopping at a place like the Brattle, for me anyway, is that if I see a book for $1 that I really want, I will usually grab it even if it's not in the form that I want. Meaning the form that I find it in is not durable. And maybe I know that I do want a durable format. I'll grab it anyway as a placeholder book, figuring it'll be on the shelf, it'll do, you'll have access to the text. Most of these things are not digitized. Until the real book comes along. That's one of the many versions of the Brattle that I got today. So I got 2 mass market paperbacks from the Mercier Press. I don't think these are going to hold up. I have one of theirs on Irish warfare. These are 2 books on Irish concerns. There are quite a few books like that out in the sale lot. The shop must have got a box or 2 in. These are both by Kevin Danaher. And one is Gentle Places and Simple Things, and the other is Irish Country People. You can see they're part of a set. This author was a folklorist who was very much interested in commemorating Irish ways, Irish people that he thought were vanishing, and of course they were vanishing. I've only read, I think, one of his books, and it was neither one of these. But I seem to remember that he had a nice companionable prose style. I just don't know how well this is going to hold up to a read. That's all. I also don't know how comfortable it's going to be to read. Then a couple more Irish books before we move on to the next theme. I found, for instance, this. This is, Stonehill College. Must have had a whole Irish library, and they just got rid of them all. Okay. This is Tom McDonough. This is My Green Age. Fantastic cover. There's the memoir, a frank, free-ranging account of his early years, not only a documentary of Dublin in the 40s and 50s, but also a moving confession of one boy's traumas. First, unrequited love, years in a sanatorium conquering TB, sexual yearnings, a spell in the Irish Communist Party, Dublin, emigration, home rule, menial job after job. The seesaw carries the reader through the story of emotional and psychological flooring that is gripping in its wide human appeal. Okay. I don't think I've ever read this. That back cover copy would lead you to believe that it covers the whole gamut of human experience and intense emotion, but of course it doesn't. That description is what Protestants always put on the back cover of Irish memoirs, when the truth of the book can be summed up in one word: Ma. It's just that. That's all it is. It's the Ma. But we'll see what variation he puts on it. I know that it will be that and nothing but that. but we'll see what variation he puts on it. And then the last Irish book. This is very much a placeholder of a book. I want to reread this thing, and I will reread it in this format, but it's going to fall apart. It's going to crack apart because this is a trade paperback that's already well and truly cracked. So, but this is an author that I really like, George Dangerfield, and this is his book, The Damnable Question. This is his Ireland book by the guy who wrote The Strange Death of Liberal England, which I love and have praised on this channel many, many times. But you can see this is already cracked. So with care, I could probably reread this, and maybe I will. But it's really a placeholder until a hardcover copy crops up. And for all I know, the person who sold all of these Irish stuff, there were plenty of other stuff, a sale lot. For all I know, the person who sold this Irish stuff did have a hardcover of this, and it will turn up. But I don't mind the look of this at all. It's nice and solid. And it isn't actually falling apart, even though it's split along the side there like that. There are no pages that are coming out. So maybe it will take a read. You never know. A few more trade paperbacks here. Yeah, just a few more. Well, the next two are Christianity related. They're both things that I have very much wanted, and they are both placeholder copies. I will try to read them. Definitely. I will even try to annotate them. But I want either e-copies of them or nice, sturdy hardcovers of both. The first one is F.F. Bruce. I've read this, but only in libraries. Never had a copy of my own. This is New Testament history. Never mind that price up there. The Brattle, well, this was $1, I think. This is remarkably fun reading. Very scholarly, tons and tons of notes about the historical background, the literary background of the New Testament. Sources, echoes of other literary conventions, all sorts of things. The big to-do that this thing made when it first came out, when did this come out? 1972? Well, 1969 it was published in the UK. And then 1971 in the United States. The big to-do that this had was that it came from a quarter of Christianity where no good scholarship ever emerges, which is fundamentalism, which was a sliver of Christianity at the time that this book came out and is now 90% of Christianity in the United States, the single most religiously fundamentalist country on earth. Fundamentalism now accounts for, of active, enthusiastic, paying, profit-making Christian churches in the country, it accounts for 90% of them. And the worst 90%. The fundamentalist churches are science-denying, they are anti-progressive, they're hateful, they're bigoted, most of them are. I'm not a broad brush, I know. There are plenty of good fundamentalist churches. There's one right in my neighborhood. But most of them are that way. That's what they're known for now, is Klan adjacent, that they're Klan adjacent. Except that the Klan is really agnostic on the subject of science. And fundamentalist Christianity in the United States is organized against science. Science is bad. No one knows anything. Dinosaurs lived with people or didn't exist at all. The world is flat and 6,000 years old. There are a lot of fundamentalists in the U.S. Congress, and they all believe things that are demonstrably false. And so they are living in an alternate reality. And that area, that run, that school of Christianity in the United States tends not to produce great works of anything. Of course, they don't like books; they burn books. The fundamentalists in this country are known. They get the way they're going to get on the evening news in Michigan is to have a book burning in Kentucky or Louisiana, and not even care that the Nazis did the same thing. They're not even going to care about it, or will like it. Some of their parishioners will like it. This author was a fundamentalist Christian, and yet this is a wonderful book, just fantastic book. And I got the trade paperback because I never see it, absolutely never see it. I've never owned a copy of my own, but I really want a hardcover. I don't know that I'll ever see one. I probably will never see one, but it was worth a try anyway. There have been plenty of times where I have bought a Placekeeper book at the Brattle over the decades, and decades later, it's still my copy, and it's holding up just fine. So I say this is a placeholder copy, but I'm happy to have it. And it might end up not being replaced by anything. Same thing with this next one, which is a much newer paperback and very solid. This could last. This is Roland Bon, who I love. He did a great biography of the pig, Martin Luther. He also did a great biography of Erasmus. And this is his one-volume history of Christianity, which is terrific. That is, I've read this, but again, only through libraries. I've never actually had a copy of my own. This is a rather nice thing, rather nice look to it. And it has a preface by Jaroslav Pelikan that I have never read. I can't imagine what it would be like. Pelikan is rather notorious for never being generous to other scholars, rather carping towards them, a master of the backhanded compliment, the backhanded insult when it comes to other scholars. Unless maybe he was a friend of Bainton's. Bainton was a very easy guy to be friends with, so I guess it's possible. If I remember correctly, their careers intersected directly at one point. I don't remember the exact details of that, but that alone would be enough to make sure that Pelikan that he'd be the last person you want to write a preface to your book. I imagine this preface was done after Bainton was dead, but I love this book. As a history of the one-volume history of Christianity, I love it. Okay, so that was a little trend there, was religion. Then we can move on to, oh no, we have one more religious book. I guess it definitely counts. I found a trade paperback of Christopher Hitchens' book, The Missionary Position. This is his full-barreled attack on Mother Teresa, on the Catholic Church's veneration, as he puts it, their veneration of poverty as opposed to the poor. He dug into Mother Teresa's background, where she gets her money, where she spends her money, how she treated the destitute poor people dying in her clinics in Calcutta, if you want to use the word clinic. I knew, before this book came out, before Hitchens started making rumblings about Mother Teresa, who, predictably, he said, poisons everything. He just kept upping the ante until finally he said religion poisons everything. And it's an open question today, a question we can never answer. It's an open question today. What Hitchens would have gone on to say poisons everything. Of course, the underlying point I'm making is that he was, at least in part, an opportunistic grifter. Because if you can say that Mother Teresa poisons everything, and then that the Clintons poison everything, and then religion poisons everything, you're lying about what you think about. They can't all poison everything. But he would have certainly have continued the gimmick. And his next book, after God Is Not Great, would have been... He would have said the same thing on Charlie Rose and everywhere else. He would have said that, really, I've been writing this book my whole life. He said that about this. He said that about the Clinton book. He said that about God Is Not Great. And the open question here that we'll never be able to answer is, what would the next thing have been that poisons everything? It's really a binary choice. It would either have been Trumpism, or the precursor to Trumpism poisons everything, or it would have been liberalism poisons everything. There's no way to know which direction it would have gone in. Gives me the heebie-jeebies to think about it. But this, I knew something about this when he started brooding it around in Vanity Fair and elsewhere. And I confess, my first thought was the same thought that everybody had, which was, Mother Teresa. How are you going to pick on her? What could you possibly be doing wrong? Then I remembered that I had read reporting, some little bits and pieces here and there, never in the Catholic press, but in Le Monde, I believe. I know this book won't give me any of the antecedents, but I'd read rumblings of people being critical about this figure. But this is not only the full blast of that criticism, but it's hugely entertaining to read. It takes half an hour to read. It's not what it should be. But I don't have any of Hitchens' little stuff. I have his big book, arguably. I don't have any of the little books. I don't have, for instance, his little book on Kissinger, which I would absolutely love to have a copy of that. But I found this. It was mixed in with all the other religious books, so I grabbed it. So that is the religious theme. Then we can move on to random stuff to start with. We've got one other theme here. But I found a Penguin Classic, not only a Penguin Classic, but a Penguin Classic Deluxe Edition that I don't have. Penguin never sent this to me. And I very much wanted it. Every time I would see a booktuber talk about it or have it on their shelf, I was always envious. And it's Rashomon. Rashomon and Other Stories by Akutagawa in this Penguin Classic Deluxe Edition with this. Look at that. Look at that artwork. How incredible. That wraps all the way around. Gives us the back flap as well. This has the deckled edges on the French flaps. These Penguin Classic Deluxe Editions are terrific, and this is one that I've wanted. I have read this author, but these are new translations by J. Rubin. And I don't know that I've read. There was a book called Rashomon and Other Stories that was a trade paperback that existed in the early 90s. I read that and loved it, but I don't think I've ever read this volume. I think I was just patiently waiting on Penguin to send it, and they never did. So always a good day when you get a Penguin Classic to the Brattle. Then I found an older work of Shakespeare scholarship. I have a discrete Shakespeare shelf. It's always on the verge of getting too big for just one shelf, but I try to pare it down. This book, though, again, I have only read it out of a library. I had no idea I would ever find a copy. This is an anthology of scholarly work called The Riddle of Shakespeare's Sonnets. With all sorts of people in. Northrop Frye is in here. He has the most notable entry. There's R.P. Blackmore, Stephen Spender, Leslie Fiedler. And also there's Oscar Wilde's little novel, The Portrait of W.H., which attempts to go at the question, the two great questions of the sonnets are, who is W.H., and also, who is the Dark Lady? But also the larger question of what's going on here? What the heck is going on here? Half these sonnets are passionate love songs to a woman, and the other half are passionate love songs to a man, by a man. So there are all sorts of riddles. It's not just one riddle. There are all sorts of riddles in here, and this is just pieces that were gathered together for this book. I haven't read this in forever. When did this first come out? 1962. That's probably the last time I read it. So, very happy to add this to the Shakespeare pile. Definitely. For $1? Absolutely. Then I found a thriller in hardcover. I would have grabbed this in paperback, but it was dirt cheap, so I grabbed it anyway. This is Clive Cussler. But Clive Cussler, when he was making his bones, when he was out there writing his heart out, and this is probably his best-selling book, Raise the Titanic, in which the Pentagon, the U.S. Defense Department, has a secret operation in mind. They're so enthused about it. But it requires a mysterious ingredient. I don't remember the name of that ingredient. Byzanium or something like that. But it turns out that it's so rare that it's almost unobtainable. It's not unobtainium, but it's almost unobtainable. But it turns out there was some on the Titanic. And so Dirk Pitt, who the cover copy here refers to as a jack of all trades, master of many, because Dirk Pitt is Superman, basically. He is tasked with raising the Titanic so that we can get at this element in its hold. This thing, when did this come out? Oh my God, look at Clive Cussler. Good Lord, the cable knit sweater. Look at that. Oh my. Wow. All right. Well, that was well before he became an institution. This came out in 1976, and I had all sorts of questions. All sorts of questions when I was reading this. When it came out in 1976, I probably read it right after that in paperback, and I had all sorts of questions. I was thinking, well, the Titanic didn't just sink in a straight line to the bottom of the Grand Banks. You do know that, right? I mean, it hit the floor of the ocean traveling really fast. It's smashed into probably lots and lots of pieces. It's not like the hold is still there with all the stuff inside it. You'd have to search. In other words, the element you're looking for is probably not inside the Titanic. It's probably on the ocean floor. And also, the Titanic was made of iron, mostly, and was at the bottom of the ocean for 100 years. If you bring it to the surface, it's going to instantly dissolve into dust and blow into the wind. It's rust and dust and blow into the wind. There are all sorts of things wrong here. Of course, this was written long before we thought that we could visit the wreck of the Titanic and see it with cameras. Long before then. The wreck of the Titanic was less accessible to mankind when this book was written than literally the surface of the moon. But it's still a lot of fun. It's a dumb adventure novel, as all of Dirk Pitt books are, but it's so enjoyable. So I grabbed it. I think, perhaps, for Garb August. I would have grabbed it anyway. Then, work of history. I had this thing many, many times. I always get rid of it. I sing its praises, and one of you wants it, and a lot of you genuinely live in used book deserts. A lot of you don't, and just know how to play me like a fiddle. But a lot of you do. A lot of you do live in. You don't want to deal with book dealers online, and I don't blame you at all. But absent that, a lot of you have no way to get used books. Just nothing at all. A few little free libraries in your neighborhood, but otherwise nothing. And that's not true for me, and you know it, because I've been happy to tell you. I have a fire hose of used books all the time. So I'm happy to look for you. I'm happy to find things for you and send them to you. I grouse about it, but I'm joking. I'm happy to do that. Because the parasocial relationship that obtains on YouTube is somehow weirdly reversed here. I'm the one schlepping to the post office every morning to mail off books to people instead of them mailing books to me. But there are exceptions in that regard, so I don't so much complain. But every time I mention this book, there is a hand that goes up that wants it. I'm going to try and hold on to this copy because this is really a book to keep. This is a book that I praised many times before on this channel. It's Among the Dead Cities by A.C. Grayling, who's soft-spoken and very intelligent and not at all what you would consider a firebrand like Hitchens, but who tenaciously pursues questions in this book that are very uncomfortable. Because this book is about moral atrocities committed in World War II. Period. Not moral atrocities committed by the bad guys, but moral atrocities committed by everybody, including the good guys. The firebombing of Dresden, the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, other fire bombings, the saturation bombing campaigns that were done in an already supine and conquered Western Europe at the insistence of Winston Churchill. A.C. Grayling looks at these things in this book, and it's indispensable. It's amazing. It's incredibly unsettling, but it's an indispensable book. So I want to have a copy. I want to have a copy for my own that I don't just send away. Then the next three books are history, and they are sparked by something that is not out yet. They're sparked by this thing, A Day in September by Stephen Budiansky, which is a study of the Battle of Antietam in the American Civil War. The author, you can see by the subtitle there, the world that it left behind, is the typical way that Antietam is studied. The battle is often studied as just a battle, but it's also studied as a sociological turning point in the war. This was General Lee on the Confederate side versus General McClellan on the Union side. And this was relatively early in the war. Lee was maneuvering in Maryland within striking distance of the U.S. Capitol with still a large army. The army was a wreck, but it was still large. And he had not only General Longstreet, but also General Stonewall Jackson to help him. Those are formidable lieutenants. McClellan didn't have anyone like that. He just had a much greater advantage in materiel, men and materiel, and supplies. But there was always a worry. If Lee had struck for Washington, that's a worry. You don't want that to happen. This was a time period when European powers were talking about maybe negotiating a peace between North and South. Lee made proclamations in Maryland to the people saying that what he was looking for was a peace between the South and between the Confederacy and the Union, rather than just military victory. So when the war started out, everyone thought it cannot possibly go on for long. We'll bloody each other's noses and then we'll start talking. Because we're brothers. We're brothers and sisters. This cannot go... Sure, things are running at a high pitch now. But once something like Shiloh happens, well, everybody will go back to their corners and think straight again. The fever will break. That absolutely didn't happen. In fact, the opposite started to happen. It started to look like a long, horrifying campaign. Fought on American soil, in American towns, in and amongst American civilians. With huge casualties. Antietam had more casualties than any other single day of warfare in any war that America has ever fought. And those numbers were terrifying to everyone involved. But in Washington, Lincoln was thinking, well, I don't want to have come this far to have England or France negotiate a peace between the Confederacy and the Union. I don't want all those Union soldiers to have died in vain. I don't want that to happen. In other words, I need to broaden this conflict. I need to make it about something else other than just who's fighting who in what valley along the Rappahannock. And he had an idea in mind, which was the Emancipation Proclamation, but he needed a victory. He couldn't just announce it out of nowhere. It would look desperate. He needed a victory. And so the battle did change the war. It changed everything. And it has been a subject of relentless study. And I knew that this book was coming. This is coming out in September. And usually when I know this about a subject that's coming up, I will use the Brattle as a research library. I will notice if the sale lot has some books on a subject that I know I'm going to be reading up on down the line. And that happened today. I found, for instance, another copy of this book. This is Richard Slocton's book. I've already done this in Brattle halls before. I always manage to get rid of it. I send it away to one of you. But I wanted a copy of this to refer to when I write about this. And that's The Long Road to Antietam. This is a much bigger book where this author... this is a nice thing about the Brattles. You can just sort of... You can rely on a book turning up again. Almost always. You can rely on a book turning up again if you need another copy. I always just think that. The Brattle will provide. Sometimes I'm more amazed than others. I'm going to end this Brattle mail haul, this Brattle book haul, with a book cropping up a second time that I never thought would happen. But I knew I would see this again, and I definitely want it when I'm researching. It's also a very good book. Slotkin is, as you can tell from the length of this thing, he does a lot of extra concentration on the social and political side of what was going on in Richmond and in Washington leading up to the Battle of Antietam, leading up to not only it needing to be fought and the armies being where they are, but the significance on the social level. And I also found James McPherson's book, Crossroads of Freedom, his little book about Antietam. He wrote A Battle Cry of Freedom, which is probably the best-selling single-volume history of the Civil War that's ever been written. He wrote a little book on Antietam that I read this when it came out in the early 2000s. Yeah, 2002. I read this when it came out and didn't think there was much to it. I thought it struck me as a dashed-off thing, but I will try it again. It was $1. I will add it to the pile of things that I can read about Antietam or reread about Antietam. And then I also got a hardcover copy of something that is going to stay here. I don't know that these others will. But this will stay here, and it's long overdue to stay here. Every time I get a copy, I mail it away. But I'm going to hold on to this one. This is one of the best-selling battle histories in the American publishing industry. And certainly one of the best-selling U.S. American Civil War books. This is Stephen Sears' book, Landscape Turned Red. His book about the Battle of Antietam. That I've seen this in a million different editions of the Brattle and everywhere else. This is in your used bookstore. It's in your library. It was a phenomenon. And I know that, and I know that I should have a copy. Every time I get a copy, I send it out. But I know that I should have one. Now I have a need to concentrate on Antietam for the rest of the summer. So I will do that, and I will hold on to this copy. I'll heavily annotate it and hold on to it. So there's a little American Civil War concentration there. Then I found, we'll finish up here with 3 more books. I found a book that I have not seen in forever. This came out in the late 70s, I think. 1978 is probably when I read this last. This is by Tad Schultz. This is The Illusion of Peace. All about the foreign policy of Kissinger and Nixon. It's not all about that, of course, because in 78, the author was an absolutely indefatigable reporter, a sleuth, an enemy to entrenched power, an enemy to silent complicity. The state of mainstream media in the world today would have driven him insane. But this isn't all there is to know about that foreign policy, because a lot of it was secret when he was writing this book. But it's big and it's so good. And I've never seen it. I've never seen it out in the sale line. I'm hoping that it does not start a trend. I'm really hoping that this is not the beginning of a series of serious books about the Nixon administration. There are a bunch of bad books about the Nixon administration, but there are a whole bunch of really serious books about it. I don't want to read them again. I don't want to own them again. I don't want them sitting there and guilting me at the Brattle sale lot. I know it's important, very important. Some of the most important foreign policy decisions made in the 20th century. But I find that whole period, and especially the man, so soiling to read about. This will be different. This is terrific stuff. Firebrand stuff. A little bit... This author could be a little bit credulous in the last places on earth that you'd expect it. He'll be going along just sledgehammering left, right, and center. And all of a sudden he'll strike a weirdly pious note that maybe that's healthy. Maybe that's the right way to write a book like this. I certainly never felt it. I reached a point with Richard Nixon when I said, okay, everything that you do is a lie. Everything is deceitful in some way or another. I'm no longer granting you the benefit of the doubt about anything. Because sooner or later, if I dig down on any detail at all, I'm going to find that it was a lie. Self-serving, horrible, villainous, creepy lie. I'm going to find that to be true no matter what. I haven't found any examples of the contrary. So I'm going to believe nothing but the worst of you at all times. And when he left power, I honestly thought, you said to friends here over wine and calzones, I said, well, at least That mind frame of just feeling absolutely certain that you, whatever public figure, are always lying, you are always evil. Never a chance. I'm not evaluating anymore. I'm going to assume that you are lying about something and that the truth will be horrifying. I said to friends over wine and calzones, well, he's gone. He's not in jail, but he's gone. And at least now I can never think that about any public figure again. And I was wrong. I can freely admit that. Then this next one, well, I couldn't really turn this next one down. I confess, hoping that I would find this at the shop. I mentioned yesterday in a video that I've had so many responses to. I might have to make a separate video about all the responses I've had. I made a video yesterday about an event that Greg at Another Bibliophile Reads is proposing of reading Proust in 2025. Taking 2025, however much of it is necessary, to have a whole bunch of booktubers read Remembrance of Things Past, In Search of Lost Time. I don't know if I'm going to participate. I don't know what I'm going to do in 2025, but I love the idea. Of course, I love the dream of it. And as I mentioned yesterday, if you've always had this thing hovering over you and always wondered if you're ever going to get to it, you're never going to have better company than BookTube to do that. And when I was on my way to the Brattle this morning, I was thinking, well, there are a couple of things I wouldn't mind seeing. One in particular. You can't go to the Brattle with a shopping list in your mind. That's a bad idea. The gods will notice that, and you will find nothing. But I thought a few years ago there was a gigantic 1,000-page biography of Proust, and I thought once you're done with the sale lot and you go indoors, maybe go and look and see if that's there, because that's my way into a subject. That's just my reflex, is to read a big fat biography of it, no matter what it is. And it wasn't there. But I confess, the thing that was there is something I wasn't expecting. I wasn't expecting it. I wasn't thinking about it, or I would have hoped that it was there instead. Because I read this book and liked it the first time. I found it again. And this is by Phyllis Rose, and it's called The Year of Reading Proust. How do you like that for timing? This came out, when did you come out? 1997. And I read this at the time. And I remember I started out thinking, better you than me, sister. And then I was about halfway through the book, and I was saying out loud, better you than me, sister. And then by the end of the book, I was saying, better you than me, sister. I was just shouting at the top of my lungs. And it occurred to me years and years later, I never see this in used bookstores, it occurred to me years and years later, that's not really a good way to read a book. I'm not really doing anything with the book if I do that. I've got it out of my system. So now I will effectively be reading this for the first time. This is the author's recollection of reading Proust in the entire course of a year. Exactly the thing that Greg is proposing that everybody do in 2025. It's really a perfect thing to find. And this, I don't know about the rest of these things, but this definitely goes on the pile for tonight. And then the last thing, I was not expecting this. I was not expecting to ever find a copy of this again. This is one of the great works of nonfiction in the 20th century. I would argue one of the top 3 greatest works of nonfiction in the 20th century. This is by Lawrence of Arabia, and this is 7 Pillars of Wisdom, but it's in this particular version, this old Doubleday version, this is a little beaten up, but usually this is in much, much worse shape. So I was happy. There is the author. I was happy to see this in this shape, because I had a copy of this. I still do in the little book room, but it's battered all to hell and gone. I saw it just the other day, and I wanted a replacement volume for it. Every time I see it, when I'm moving books around in there, I think, boy, it'd be great if I had a better condition copy of this. And my first thought whenever that happens is, well, yeah, it'd be great, but you'll never see it. It's not common enough an edition. I have the paperback and I have the ebook. And every time I would look at this thing, I would think, well, you're never going to find a copy of it that's in any kind of reasonable condition, so just give up on it. And then I did today, because the Brattle will provide. So I will put a dust jacket over this and clean it up, and there you go. So I'll be able to throw my old copy away, because it's in like 4 pieces. So there you go. That was a freelance Brattle book trip. I wasn't provoked by Aaron Facer. I wasn't provoked by David Murphy. I wasn't provoked by anybody. I went on my own to the Brattle, and I had a blast. Lugged all these things back here just in time to hunker down with all these books before a few really hot days. Maybe not a technical heat wave, but really hot. So Good reading. I will have lots and lots of good reading. So what kind of a Steve Pyramid can we do here? We have Seven Pillars of Wisdom, a great work of literature. A great work of literature. It belongs on the same shelf as Black Lamb and Grey Falcon or A Room of One's Own. It is a great work of nonfiction. We have The Year of Reading Proust. I can't believe that I found this. That goes on the list for tonight. We have The Illusion of Peace, Foreign Policy under Nixon and Kissinger. We have Landscape Turned Red, the most popular book on the Battle of Antietam. We have Crossroads of Freedom, a little book on Antietam that might yield some good insights by a dean of Civil War writing. We have The Long Road to Antietam, which I sent away my last copy, no idea who got it, probably Bill Rutenberg. And then Among the Dead Cities by A.C. Grayling, really a disturbing book, but necessary. Raise the Titanic by Clive Cussler. The Riddle of Shakespeare's Sonnets. This is a real find. Wasn't expecting to find that at all. We have the Penguin Classic Deluxe Edition of Rashomon and Other Stories by Akutagawa. We have The Missionary Position by Christopher Hitchens, his excoriation of the saintly Mother Teresa. We have Christianity, one-volume history by Roland Bon. Happy to have this. I'll read the preface tonight, at least. New Testament history. Terrific. Didn't think I would ever have a copy of that. We have The Damnable Question. Terrific. Didn't think I would ever have a copy. These three really are placeholder copies. I would hope that maybe I will find more durable copies of all three of them. And finally, three Irish stuff. My Green Age, and two Kevin Danaher books. Two of his. I think that Mercier Press put out a bunch of these. I only found two. And they're worth, for $1 a piece, they're worth strolling through just to see what kinds of little ditties are in there. And then, think nothing of it, probably get rid of them. So anyway, that was a trip to the Brattle. That is the last trip to the Brattle this week. I will not be going back. It is going to be too hot this week, so I will be back next week to the Brattle, and we'll see what I find then. I need more books. But anyway, I'll wrap this up for now, but I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.